you're wanting to get started in learning how to dye yarn or dye fiber, but you're kind of unsure of all the materials that you are going to need. Well, I'm going to be going over some basic materials in today's video. And a lot of the materials are going to depend on what type of technique that you are trying to accomplish. And just to name a few, there is the low or high immersion technique that you'll see most common. And then there is the tie-dye technique, steaming technique. You can also dye yarn in the microwave as well. Now, when it comes to dyeing yarn in a microwave, I do not recommend putting a metal bowl or pan in the microwave because that would be a disaster. So those are just some techniques that you can use. There's more than that, I'm sure. Those are just some techniques that I have used in the past. Now, I will make sure that there is a list, if I haven't mentioned that already. There is going to be a list at the end of today's video of all of the materials that you'll need, and I'll try to organize them based on the process going through dyeing yarn, also kind of along with the techniques as well. So the very first thing that we want to do when dyeing yarn is pre-soaking. So pre-soaking. Now I'm going to kind of backtrack real quick. Now also the materials are going to change depending on the fiber content, whether they are a protein fiber or if they're more of a synthetic or a plant base, it is going to change. Now, I am specifically going to, in today's video, talk about acid dyes. And acid dyes go along with protein fibers like wool, alpaca, angora. Anything that is coming off of an animal is a protein fiber. So when pre-soaking, you are going to need your fiber, of course. And then you are going to need, with dyeing with acid dyes and protein fibers, the reason why we call them acid dyes is because anything that's acidic that you are going to be pre-soaking your fiber with is what's going to help your dyes soak into the fiber along with a heat source. So you will need either citric acid, which I've got some in this baggie, and then also some white distilled vinegar. Now, how much you use is going to depend on how much fiber you are using. I can't give you ratios right now, but along with that, you are going to need some cold water and then a bin of some sort to soak your fiber in. And you'll usually soak that for about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll move on to the process of actually dyeing your fiber. Now, this is where the acid dye comes in, the actual dye itself. So this is going to change, the materials are going to change depending again on the technique. So let's go over an immersion technique and the materials that you are going to need for an immersion. You are going to need, of course, your fiber, your dye, and you're going to need water along with a pan. Now, I do not have a pan today, but the choice of pan or pot that you use is very significant. You want to look for a stainless steel pot or pan. You do not want to use aluminum or a cast iron or ceramic. The reasoning why is because, for one, if you use a cast iron, using anything acidic with a cast iron is going to ruin your cast iron. If you're using aluminum or ceramic, those metals are going to soak into your fiber or have the chance of soaking into your fiber, along with the dye will ruin that pan as well. So you really want to use something stainless steel. A lot of people will use the hot bar pans, and that's what I highly recommend, is a hot bar pan. Now, you are going to need a source of heat, whether that be your stovetop, if you're using, depending on how your stovetop is set up, whether it's actually the burners or if you have a glass top, you might need to get a hot pad. You can also use your oven as well. When you are using heat on your fiber, you do not want to exceed the heat of 200 degrees Fahrenheit, because if you go over 200 degrees Fahrenheit, you can risk the chance of burning your fiber, and that will ruin your yarn or your fiber, and you don't want that going through this process, because that really sucks after a lot of work that you're putting into. So we've got the fiber, we've got your hot pan, heat source, your dyes. Now you can, if you would like to, add a little bit more something acidic into your immersion if you would like, but you don't have to if you've already pre-soaked it. Some people pre-soak their fibers with the citric. Some people will go ahead and while they're actually dyeing the fiber, add it in then. So it just depends on what you prefer. You are going to need some gloves. Now, I don't use gloves, but they are highly recommended, especially if you do not want to dye your hands. You are going to need your acid dye of choice of color or brand. I use the Jacquard's acid dyes. You can also, with protein fibers, use food coloring. Your coloring might not be as vibrant with food colors. Some people have also used Kool-Aid packets. There's just some other ideas out there as well. With the acid dye, you are going to need measuring spoons. And let me go ahead and throw this out there as well. Anything that you are using to dye your fiber or your yarn with, you really want to make sure it is specifically used for that purpose only. You do not want to mix this in with your cookware that you cook with on a daily basis where you are using a dye. Please do not mix your materials with your everyday cookware. Please do not. This is specifically, all these materials are specifically for dyeing your fiber. Okay, so I think that goes over all the materials for the immersion. You may also need to pick up some measuring cups as well. And of course, the given is you are going to need some water. You can also use, if you really want to get technical, you can use a scale so that you can measure out how much dye you're using, which also the measuring spoons kind of go along with that as well. You can use tongs. You can also use a spoon. Those are just some extra and kind of also given materials as well. Some people will also put a mask on, and they do highly recommend you putting a mask on when you're dealing with these dyes, just because it is a powder form as well. So as far as immersion process, I think that is all the materials. Again, there is going to be a list of all the materials that you're going to need at the end to help you, because I know this can be, I'm having some scroll moments here. So if you are wanting to use like a tie-dye technique, what you're going to need for that is some squirt bottles. I have gotten this in a tie-dye kit, and this is my favorite technique just because I feel like I have a lot more control with dyeing the yarn or the fiber than I do have with an immersion. And then you're going to need a source of heat. A lot of people will steam their fiber by rolling it up in like a plastic, like some plastic wrap, and then actually sit the fiber into a plastic bag. They will heat up a pot of water and then put the fiber that's in your plastic bag into that boiling water and let it steam for about 20 minutes. You'll also need like a plastic sheet cover to cover up your counters or whatever you're dyeing with or on top of, along with gloves. And if you come back this coming Sunday, January 26th at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, you'll actually be able to see a video that will be published of me dyeing some fiber, because I have a pound of fiber that I need to dye using the tie-dye technique. So you'll actually be able to see that in full swing and what I do preparing and going through the process and finishing up my fiber. So please come back on January 26th. If it's already past that date, just go back a few videos or something and you'll actually be able to see me use that technique. Now, the other technique that I also kind of mentioned was the microwave technique. And kind of use some common sense here, please. Like I mentioned earlier, do not put metal pots or pans or bowls into the microwave. That is not safe at all. Use something that is microwave safe if you are deciding to use that technique. So a glass jar, a glass bowl, something that is microwave safe. Now you do have to be careful using that technique because you do not want to reach over 200 degrees as well. And using a microwave, you do get to that point fairly quickly. So you do want to be careful. Kim Knits does have an awesome video of her kind of going over using the microwave technique, and I will link that down in the description box if you would like to check that out. So that's just some techniques that we will talk about, or we have talked about. Now, the next step after you have dyed your yarn, you really, if you're using an immersion technique, you want to make sure that your bath has been exhausted. And what I mean by that is if you were to look at the water underneath your fiber, then it's going to be clear or almost clear. Sometimes it depends on the dye that you're using and the color. Sometimes it doesn't fully exhaust and become clear, but if it's close enough, that is exhausting your bath. Or if you're steaming your fiber in the microwave or the oven or in a boiling pot of water, you want to boil it for 20 minutes or up to the point where you have reached no more than 200 degrees Fahrenheit. After that has completed, you now need to let your fiber or your yarn cool completely to a cool water temperature. The reason why I say that is because if you take that hot yarn or fiber and pull it right underneath a cold water, you will wilt or mat your fiber. When there is a drastic change of temperature between hot and cold with fiber especially, you do wilt. That's how you wilt fiber. So you want to make sure that your yarn or your fiber is completely cooled before we go to rinsing our yarn. So when you are rinsing your yarn, you want to be near a water source. So whether that's your sink or your bathtub, whichever, you are going to need a bin or a container of some sort because you do not want to rinse your fiber or your yarn directly underneath your faucet while the water is running. When you agitate fibers too much, they become wilted or matted. And again, that sucks and it's hard to come from. So you will need a bin or a container of some sort. You'll fill your water up with cold water. You can also use a wool wash if you would like. You do have to be careful on if you're using some kind of detergent, whether that's dish soap or detergent itself. You do have to be careful. I do not recommend using detergents unless it is a wool wash. Something that does not have a degreaser in it because you can harm your fibers and break them. So you do have to be careful if you're using a detergent on what you are using. You do not have to use a wool wash or detergent or soap or anything like that. It does help though. But you'll let it soak for 20 minutes in cold water. and then you'll dump that water out, and that's where a colander can come in handy, because you could just pick it up and then dump your water without having to dump your fiber in the sink or the bathtub. But you can just dump your water out. You'll fill the bin back up with water, and repeat that process until your water has been gone completely clear. So after your water has been completely clear, so now we have a bin and a colander, you can use a salad spinner, which helps out quite a bit to get any excess water out of your fiber or your yarn. You can also just let it sit in a colander and let it drain itself, or you can also kind of wring it a little bit. You want to be careful doing that because, again, you don't want to agitate it too much. And then after you have gone through that whole process, the next thing is just to let your yarn or your fiber dry. So that's kind of the whole process of dyeing yarn and some of the materials that you are going to need. Again, there is going to be a list here in a second that I have created for you that goes all of the materials that you are going to need in order to dye yarn, dye fiber, whichever one that you are dyeing. But if you do have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can always feel free to ask. I love helping you guys. I love when you guys ask me questions. Again, it gives me content to help you guys out, or even sometimes even help myself out or refresh my memory. So again, if you do have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can always email me or ask away in the comments. So look for that list. I hope you all have a wonderful day. If you did enjoy this video, please don't forget to give this video a like, share, comment, or subscribe. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you guys in the next video.